All right, students, we arrive at the last part of this big chapter, um, talking about um, the human impact on the biosphere, or in other words, the biosphere and the ecology, or very simply, conservation of biodiversity. So we already talk about conservation biology and biodiversity, the direct to indirect value of biodiversity, the causes of extinctions, and today we're going to cover the last part, which is the conservation techniques. Conservation techniques. So, despite the value of biodiversity to our very survival, human activities are causing the extinctions, as we seen earlier in early slides, of thousands of species a year. Clearly, we need to reverse this trend and preserve as many species as possible. Habitat preservation and restorations are the most important to, to start with preserving the biodiversity. Habitat preservation of a species habitat is a primary concern then. By first, we must prioritize which species to preserve. We have to give priority to those species to be preserved. We, as we already mentioned before, the biosphere contains biodiversity hotspot, a relatively small area having a concentration of native species that we call the endemic species, the native, not found in any place else, just there. For example, in the tropical rainforest of Madagascar, 93% of the primate species, 99% of the frog species, and over 80% of the plant species are endemic there, found only in Madagascar. Preserving this forest and other hotspots would save a wide variety of organisms. Did you see the biodiversity in just in this place, Madagascar? This is what we call hot spot, if you remember. So preserving first their habitat will save a wide variety of organisms. We have the first, I'm sorry, we have the the first species that we call the keystone species. Those are species that influence the viability of a community. Although their number may not be very high, but the extinction of those keystone species can lead to the other extinction and a loss of biodiversity. For example, the pollinators that are dispersed, that also disperse the seed of the trees. When we kill bats and their roots destroyed, the tree fails to reproduce. The grizzly bear that we saw earlier is a keystone species in the northwest United States and Canada. The bear disperses the seeds of berries. As many as 7,000 might be in one dung pile. Grizzly bears also are the principal mover of soil when they dig up roots and pry open hibernating ground squirrels and marmots. There are also other keystone species such as elephant in grassland and forest, alligators in swamps. Keystones, however, should not be confused with the flagship species. Flagship species evoke a strong emotional response in humans. Flagship species are considered have charismatic, and are treasures for their beauty, the acute strength, or regal nature. These species can help motivate the public to preserve biodiversity. They include the monarch butterflies, lions, tigers, dolphins, giant pandas. Some other keystone species could be also flagship species. For example, we gave an example of the grizzly bear is also a flagship species, but we prefer to give it a value that a keystone species because it's a role in an ecosystem. The grizzly bear's populations, for example, is actually in meta-populations. Meta mean higher order. A large population that has been subdivided into several small isolated populations due to their habitat fragmentations. Originally, there were an estimate about 50 to 100K thousands of grizzly bears south of Canada. Unfortunately, this number has been reduced as a result of human housing communities um, competing, what we call the word, encroaching on their home range. And bears are often, unfortunately, killed when they came in contact with people, with humans. Saving the meta-population sometimes require determining which of the population is a source and which are sinks. A source population, what is it? Is one that is stable and growing in size, producing an excess of individual. Often its birth rate is higher than its death rate. The excess individual from source population will move into sink populations where the environment is not as favorable as where the birth rate equals or is often lower than the death rate. An example, the northern oil produced successfully in old growth rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, but not in nearby immature forests that are in the process of recovering from logging. Next, we are going to talk about the landscape preservation. I keep this mega mega meta populations meta population, which is also mega populations. Mega mean higher, mega mean higher too. Large population. Landscape preservation. So grizzly bear inhabit a number of different type of ecosystem, including plains, mountains, and river. Saving only one of these ecosystems will not be sufficient enough to preserve the grizzly bears. It, however, instead, it is necessary to save as many of the connected system that form the entire range of grizzly. We talk about the landscape and how he encompasses different types of ecosystems. An area called the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, where bears are free to roam, has been defined. It contains millions of acres in the Yellowstone National Park in Montana, Idaho, five national forests, various wildlife refuges, and even private lands. So, landscape protections for one species is often beneficial for other wildlife that share the same space. What is the edge effect? It's a transition from one habitat to another. In the case of land development, an edge may be very defined as when a forest farms fields, abuts farm fields. The edge reduces the amount of habitat typically of an ecosystem. The typical amount of habitats to each reduce that because each habitat is slightly different from that of the interior of the patch that is determined, which determine actually the edge effect. For example, forest edge are brighter, warmer, drier, and they have strong wind on them, with more vines, weeds than the forest interior. So in the next slide, and I will show that a small and a large patch of habitat both have the same depth of edge. Therefore, the effective habitat shrink as a patch gets smaller. The smaller the patch, the greater the proportion, the proportion that is subject to the edge effect. The co Those birds, for example, lay their eggs in the nest of the songbirds, yellow warblers. A, a cowbird is bigger than warbler nesting and is able to acquire most of the food brought by the warbler parent. Many popular game animals, such as a turkey, white deer, are there are more of them in the edge of a region of a particular area. So the edge effect can also have a serious impact on population size. The songbird population west of Mississippi have been declining, and scientists have noticed that the nesting success of the songbird is quite low at the edge of the forest. The cause turned out to be the brown-headed cowbirds, a social parasite of songbirds. Adult cowbirds prefer to feed in an open agricultural area and they only bravely enter the forest when searching for a host nest to lay their eggs. That's it. So the cowbirds here are therefore benefit from that, but the songbirds are not benefiting by this edge effect. The restorations, habitat restoration, which is also a subdiscipline of conservation biology, if I, that took that looked like for scientists a way to return the ecosystem to their natural state. Restoring an habitat has a three key principles. First, it should start as quickly as possible to avoid losing the remaining fragment, because once you lose it, you don't have any initiation, any start. So it have to be start as quickly as possible to avoid losing the remaining fragments of the original habitat. Second, once the natural histories of the species in the habitat are understood, it is best to mimic natural processing to bring about restoration. Natural process can include using controlled burns to bring back grassland habitats, biological pest control to get rid the area of exotic species, and bioremediation technique to clean up pollutions. Third, the goal is sustainable development, the ability of an ecosystem to be self-sustaining while still providing services to humans. Unfortunately, humans have created a perfect storm of conditions that have pushed the biodiversity of our planet into the beginning stage of a sixth mass extinction. Even though, even though we may never reach the 75 threshold, the damage to biodiversity will have a ripple effect that will disturb every ecosystem on Earth. While the life has recovered from each of the previous five mass extinctions that we talked about it earlier, it is unclear how devastating this will be for us as humans. So in summary, conservation in biology is the scientific study of biodiversity and its management, all right, for sustainable human welfare. The inequality present rate of extinction has drawn together scientists and environmentalists in basic and applied field to address the problem by using the science of bioinformatics. Biodiversity is described as the number of species in a given habitat. Conservation biology looks to identify which species are in danger, are threatened to be uh, um, disappearing. Biodiversity is a combination of a three level of organizations: genetics diversity, community diversity, landscape diversity, in which the interacting ecosystem form a landscape. We did discover that biodiversity, I mean, the conservationists did discover that the biodiversity is not evenly distributed in the biosphere. Some areas have high concentrations of biodiversity. They are called biodiversity hotspots. They are value for biodiversity. Those value can be direct and can be indirect. The direct value of biodiversity is seen in the economic value that a species provides to humans. The indirect provided by ecosystem are largely unseen and difficult to quantify, but they are absolutely necessary to our well-being. Those services include the workings of geochemical cycles, waste recycling, provisions of fresh water, prevention of the soil erosions, the regulation of the climate. We also talk about the cause of extinctions, exotic species, pollutions, climate change, and other exploitations. The habitat loss as acquired in all parts of the biosphere, but concern has low centered on the tropical rainforest and coral reef, where biodiversity is especially very high. Various causes of pollution include fertilizer runoff, industrial emissions, improper disposal of waste. Climate change is contributing to species extinctions too, but at this point, the full impact is still being explored. Overexploitation by commercial, for example, fishing, which is so efficient that the fishery of the world are collapsing. The last one, we talk about the technical conservation how to preserve species. It's necessary to preserve key habitat that contain. We start with the key habitat, preserve that first, the most species. And we talk about the key species, the keystone species that are one that influence the viability of the community and are of significant importance. The flagship species are those that evoke an emotional response by humans and can be used to help promote conservation. Oh, he's so cute that I am not going to kill him or her. This animal is so cute. So yeah, it evoke an emotional response. Today, it's becoming very necessary to save the metapopulations because of a past habitat fragmentations. If this happens, it is best to determine the source population and prioritize those over the sink populations. When preserving the landscape, it is best to preserve large tracts of land due to the decreased biodiversity caused by habitat fragmentations and also by the edge effect. So because many ecosystems have been degraded, habitat restorations may be necessary before sustainable development is possible. Three principles of restorations are: start before source of wildfire and seeds are lost, use simple biological technique that mimic natural process, and aim for sustainable development so that the ecosystem can persist while fulfilling the needs of humans. So if you want to develop a good model on how to clear cutting of a forest called impact on population of songbird, you will need to know several pieces of information. The life history of the songbird will be an important piece of information to obtain. This would include on how long they live, their ecological niche, the food source, the predator, disease that would influence their populations, the type of relationship they have with the various species of trees that are going to be removed during the clear cutting, and basic habitat equipment. Information about the plant diversity in the forest will also be important to know. They would include information about the age structure of the forest, species richness, the abiotic conditions present that supports the forest type being studied. Overall, understanding the ecological relationship and connection that exists between the songbirds and the producer base in the forest will help provide a clearer picture of potential consequences of the clear cutting of forests. And that's end our chapter, biodiversity or the human impact on the on how to conserve the biodiversity. So we did identify the role of the conservation biology with regard to biodiversity, describe how conservation biology is applied with all his multidisciplinary field to manage, to provide a tool to manage this biodiversity. And we did recognize all the spectrum of biodiversity. Let's conclude our chapter, last chapter actually for 1409.